Welcome to Dialogue Doodles. I'm Jack, and today we're diving into one of the most fascinating stories in philosophical history. Imagine being just 23 years old and suddenly declared an outcast by your entire community. Everyone you've known since childhood forbidden to speak with you or even stand near you. What would you do? With us today is Henry, an expert in 17th century philosophy, and particularly in the life and ideas of Baruch Spinoza. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jack. Yes, Spinoza's story is remarkable, and what's even more fascinating is how this personal crisis led to some of the most revolutionary ideas in Western philosophy.
Before we dive into those revolutionary ideas, help us understand who Spinoza was. What was his early life like in Amsterdam's Portuguese Jewish community?
Spinoza was born in 1632 into what was actually a rather privileged position. Amsterdam's Portuguese Jewish community was prosperous and relatively free compared to Jews elsewhere in Europe. Young Baruch was seen as a brilliant religious scholar, studying the Talmud and traditional Jewish texts. Everyone expected him to become a rabbi.
So what went wrong, or perhaps I should say, what went differently than expected?
Well, Spinoza had a fiercely independent mind. While studying these religious texts, he began asking questions that made his teachers uncomfortable. But secretly, he was also reading revolutionary thinkers like Descartes, which was definitely not part of the traditional curriculum.
That must have created some tension. How did his community respond to these intellectual explorations?
It led to what might be the most dramatic moment in philosophical history: his excommunication in 1656. The herem, as it was called, was unusually harsh. He was basically declared dead to the community. Not even his own family could maintain contact with him.
That's incredibly severe. What exactly was he questioning that provoked such a strong reaction?
He was questioning some of the most fundamental religious beliefs: the idea of a personal God who makes decisions and intervenes in human affairs, the divine origin of the Bible, and even the immortality of the soul. But what made it particularly threatening was that he wasn't just doubting, he was developing a complete alternative philosophical system.
And instead of backing down when threatened with excommunication, he chose to stand by his ideas. That must have required extraordinary courage.
Absolutely. And what's remarkable is what he did next. Instead of seeking protection from another religious community or pursuing an academic career, which he could have done given his brilliant mind, he chose to become a lens grinder.
A lens grinder? That seems like an unusual choice for a philosopher. Why did he choose that path?
It was all about maintaining his intellectual independence. By grinding optical lenses for telescopes and microscopes, which were cutting-edge technology at the time, he could earn a modest living without compromising his freedom to think and write what he believed was true.
There's something almost poetic about that, crafting tools to help people see more clearly while developing ideas that would help people think more clearly.
Yes, and this brings us to his revolutionary worldview. Spinoza developed what we might call a complete reimagining of God and nature. He argued that God and nature are actually the same thing, Deus sive natura, as he put it in Latin, God or nature.
That sounds radical even today. In the 17th century, it must have been explosive.
It was absolutely revolutionary. Instead of a personal God who makes decisions and hands down commandments, Spinoza envisioned a universe that was itself divine, operating according to necessary and unchangeable laws. Everything that exists is part of this single, unified system.
That reminds me of some modern scientific perspectives. Einstein was a great admirer of Spinoza, wasn't he?
Exactly. Einstein once said that he believed in Spinoza's God, this idea of a universe governed by rational, mathematical laws rather than personal divine will. Spinoza was really ahead of his time in seeing the universe as one unified, deterministic system.
Speaking of being ahead of his time, this idea of everything being interconnected, it seems to resonate with modern environmental thinking, too.
Absolutely. Spinoza's vision of nature as one interconnected whole, where everything is part of the same unified system, does have striking parallels with modern ecological thinking. He would have understood perfectly why damaging one part of the ecosystem affects everything else.
But here's what I find fascinating. If everything is determined by natural laws, what happens to human freedom? Doesn't this create a problem for free will?
That's one of the most challenging aspects of Spinoza's thought. He has this famous quote where he says that humans believe themselves free simply because they're conscious of their desires but ignorant of the causes that determine them.
That sounds pretty deterministic, almost like we're living in a vast cosmic computer program.
That's actually a great modern analogy. Just as a computer program follows necessarily from its code, Spinoza saw everything in nature as following necessarily from the fundamental laws of reality. But he didn't see this as depressing, quite the opposite.
Really, how can determinism be liberating?
Well, for Spinoza, true freedom isn't about some magical ability to break the laws of nature. It's about understanding these laws and our place within them. The more we understand the causes that shape us, the more we can work with them rather than being blindly driven by them.
That reminds me of modern psychology and neuroscience. Understanding our mental patterns doesn't eliminate them, but it helps us work with them more effectively.
Exactly. And this points to something crucial about Spinoza. His philosophy wasn't just abstract theory. It was ultimately about human flourishing, about finding real freedom and happiness within the natural order.
And yet, pursuing this understanding came at such a personal cost for him. Do you think he found that happiness himself?
From what we know of his life, yes. Despite living very modestly and facing constant challenges to his safety, remember, this was an era when philosophers could face serious persecution. He maintained his independence and continued his work with remarkable serenity.
That's quite inspiring. But I'm curious about how his ideas apply to modern life. How can someone today benefit from Spinoza's philosophy?
There are several powerful ways Spinoza's ideas can help us today. First, his perspective on emotions is remarkably relevant. He taught that understanding our emotional reactions, seeing them as natural phenomena rather than personal failures, is the first step to gaining more control over them.
That sounds very much like modern cognitive behavioral therapy.
Precisely. And there's more. His view of nature as one interconnected system can help us think better about environmental challenges. When we truly understand that we're part of nature, not separate from it, it changes how we approach these issues.
And what about his approach to religious tolerance? That seems particularly relevant today.
Absolutely. Despite being excommunicated, Spinoza never became bitter or advocated for suppressing religion. Instead, he developed one of the first modern arguments for religious freedom and separation of church and state. He showed how different beliefs could coexist in a rational society.
So in a way, his personal crisis led to a broader vision of social harmony.
Exactly. And perhaps that's his most important lesson: how to turn personal challenges into opportunities for deeper understanding. Instead of becoming bitter about his exile, he used it as an opportunity to develop a universal philosophy that could speak to everyone.
It's remarkable how someone who was so thoroughly rejected by his community ended up having such a profound influence on modern thought.
Yes, and you can see his influence everywhere today in physics, psychology, environmental thinking, political theory. Einstein, Freud, and many modern thinkers have acknowledged their debt to him.
If Spinoza were alive today, what do you think would surprise him most about how his ideas have developed?
I think he'd be amazed to see how science has confirmed many of his intuitions about the interconnectedness of nature and the universality of natural laws. But he might be disappointed that we still struggle with many of the same human conflicts he tried to address.
Well, on that note, I think we can all benefit from Spinoza's example. His courage to think independently, his ability to find meaning in adversity, and his vision of a more rational and harmonious world. Henry, thank you for this fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Jack. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.